class. Today I'm going to be talking about evaluating sources. We've talked a little bit about this, and you gave it a try for the first annotated bibliography, but now I want to look at it more in depth as you're looking at finding more of your own sources for the second annotated bibliography project that will be due. So why do we need to evaluate sources, right? Especially, sadly, now more than ever, there is a lot of fake news out there in the world. I would say mostly for the topics that we're doing, we don't have to be as aware of fake news as, let's say, if we were doing something very contemporary. Most of the topics that we're doing, don't lend themselves well to lies. Like, why would people lie about certain things going into careers? But it's something also that you need to be aware of to make sure that in your personal life, that you're not being taken advantage of by these claims of fake news. So, spotting fake news. How do you, if you see something and you feel like it might be fake news, how do you figure out if it is real or fake, right? So the first thing you want to do is check the source. Try to figure out where that information is coming from. I just had this situation with my mom the other day. She saw something on her phone. I think it was about a celebrity who had died. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I haven't heard that from anywhere. And so when I looked at where it was from, I said, I don't know if I would believe these people. Let's look on a reliable news source that we know, like CNN or NBC News or the New York Times, to see if we can find out if this information is true. And it wasn't true, right? So that's what you want to do, is check where the source is coming from. If it's not a name source that you recognize, then it's probably not true, or see if you can find that information on another website. Another thing you can do is there are fact-checking websites like Snopes.com. And so you can go to Snopes.com and put in the information, and it will usually tell you about if anything going on the internet in recent days is true or false. And so that's another place you can go to look for as fake news. Those things I would only check, if it's something that you see that is sensational, maybe not for every topic that you're finding, but something to be aware of. Another thing you can do, and we talked about this or you read about it with the first annotated bibliography, is what we call the CRAP test, right? So looking at the information, seeing how current it is, how reliable that information is, if it's supported by research, if you can verify it in other publications. The authority, looking at who wrote this publication and what you know about them, and if they are a trusted publication. And then thinking about why this was written, and is there a bias? If a source is biased, it doesn't mean that you have to dismiss it 100% as a source. It's just something that you should be aware of, right? Especially if you're talking about a political bias or something, you should be aware that it's coming from a certain perspective. And if you're writing about maybe a controversial issue where there are two sides of the issue, and then you might want to have bias sources. You might want to have a source that represents one side of the issue and a source that represents the other side of the issue. The important thing is that you just need to recognize that maybe the person is writing from a biased position. Another thing you could do for sources, and this is going to be especially important for you as you look at sources, is if you have a publication, if you find an article and it's from a publication that you're not aware of, you can do something called lateral reading. And I'll give you an example of this in just a minute. But that means you're kind of Googling the source. You're trying to find out as much information about the source as you can. And lateral reading means you're probably just opening up a lot of different tabs at the top of your computer. And so trying to get information. Sometimes it's hard to figure out if a source is biased or coming from people you think are good and reputable. I'll give the example, right, of Chick-fil-A. If I wanted to look up Chick-fil-A, I could see information that told me, Chick-fil-A is a great company. They do great things. They have great food. But some people also don't like Chick-fil-A because they trace it back to the owner of Chick-fil-A, and that he is often cited as being against homosexuality, things like that. And so people will boycott Chick-fil-A for that reason. But on the surface, Chick-fil-A looks like a great company. It may be a great company, but some people trace it back all the way there to the owner and think his values impact that source, right? That food source. Same thing with a media source, right? And so it might be a publication that gets good ratings overall, or it seems believable, it's existed for a long time, but then you trace it back and you find out, oh, the owner has some kind of views that maybe are contrary to what you believe, or just some biased views, and that may impact the media that you're looking at. So again, that's why it's hard to know sometimes the bias. So one thing you can do that helps is exists this media bias chart, and I'll take us to this website in a minute. But this chart is created by a neutral source, and it kind of ranks different media outlets on how biased they are, right? So it's on the left is the most liberal leaning, and the right is most conservative. And then from top to bottom, the best sources, the most complex, the most reliable sources are at the top, and the least reliable are at the bottom. So things you might not be able to believe, the journalistic quality, the amount of research that they did. So you see, you want to have people who are right here at the middle because that's showing lack of bias. They're bipartisan. And of course, you want to have the people who are right at the top. Okay, so we can see at the top, the magazine The Economist, the Wall Street Journal is a good one. And then we have many of our popular newspaper or news agencies, the news agencies, NBC, ABC, CBS. Our article that we read, the first one in the semester, was from NPR, the National Public Radio, so they rank pretty high. PBS, BBC, which is the British Broadcasting Company. These are all good, reliable sources, right? Meets high standards. If they're up here, then maybe The Economist, a little bit harder to read, a little higher reading level. Here in the gray, in the middle, is probably for the most average reading level and most unbiased. And so these are all good sources here in the middle. Okay, extra resources. So let me give you an example of lateral reading and what you need to be doing when you're looking for sources. Oh, see, I've been doing too much lateral reading. I have too many tabs open. Okay, so I had gone to the Find It box and I did a search looking for college success in Black males. Here are the sources that came up. And so I was using this source and looking at the Triangle Tribune. I don't know what the Triangle Tribune is. The word Tribune makes me think of newspapers. And so that gives me an idea. So I Googled Triangle Tribune. All right, the voice of the Black community, Triangle Tribune. Tells me a little bit about it. I can click on About Us, the history, learn a little bit more about this publication. We might say because it's serving only one community, the Black community, that maybe it has a bias for issues in that community. I might argue also that that makes it good to be getting a different perspective. But just something to think about, be aware of. Another thing you can do is look up the Wikipedia. Often Wikipedia will tell you if a source is reliable or not reliable. So this just tells us it's an American English language weekly newspaper headquartered in Durham, North Carolina, founded in 1998, targets African American community. They own the Triangle Tribune and the sister paper, the Charlotte Post. Okay, so it seems like kind of a media company for North Carolina. Again, recognizing that this is a newspaper from North Carolina, the audience is going to be then for people in North Carolina. The Triangle Tribune, specifically, the audience would be for African Americans living in North Carolina. So it would be geared towards issues facing that population, right? It might have less world news, or if they're recovering world news, let's say, the election for president, they might be giving the perspective of the African American community in North Carolina. So that's kind of lateral reading, just going through, looking at your source in many different ways as you can to find out if it's a good and reliable source. All right, I think that's it in terms of talking about evaluating sources. If you have questions when you're trying to evaluate sources, as always, let me know. And of course, when you find sources using the Find It search term on our library or databases, you can pretty much be guaranteed that it's reliable and not fake news. Thanks, class. Bye-bye.